This episode is sponsored by Romanwell. Every patient experiences IBD differently and deserves a care plan that is as unique as they are. Whether you're trying to get into symptom remission, improve your energy levels, or restore your relationship with food, the IBD-focused dietitians at Romanwell are here to help you safely navigate it all. They work closely with you and your existing care team to find the best answers to your toughest questions. And they give you the consistent one-on-one support you need wherever you are on your IBD journey. Visit romanwell.com to learn how high-quality, individualized IBD nutrition care can help you achieve your health goals.
Hi, I'm Alicia.
And I'm Robin, and you're listening to Bowel Moments,
the podcast sharing real talk about the realities of IBD. Served on the rocks. This week, we share a cup of Earl Gray with Sari Grossman. We talk to her about her unique Crohn's disease and growing up with a mother with Crohn's disease. We talk to her about her career choice in immunology. We talk to her about transitioning to adult care. And we talk to her about the unique club at the University of Michigan for people living with Crohn's and colitis. And we talked to her about medical trauma and coping with medical trauma. And we talked to her about sometimes how Crohn's disease isn't a journey and isn't an inspiration. Cheers.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Bowel Moments. This is Robin.
Hey, guys. This is Alicia as well. I was just giving Robin a hard time. We are really excited to be joined by Sari Grossman. Sari, you are the second of our guests that we didn't know. You kind of came to us and said, I'm interested in joining the show. So thank you. We're really excited to talk to you because in addition to you being brave enough to say something to us like that, people you don't know, you're also just an exceptional guest. So I'm really excited to talk to you. But we started off by asking you the really professional question. What are you drinking?
Well, thank you. I'm excited to be here. I am just drinking tea. I'm not a huge drinker. I used to drink, but once I got on methotrexate, I had to tone it down a lot. And then I kind of just lost interest over time. So yeah, it's rare, but it happens. But right now, just tea.
What kind of tea?
It's Earl Gray, but I really prefer green tea, but we don't have any right now. So we're settling with Earl Gray.
I do like Earl Gray with a little bit of milk. It's lovely, although not in the summer. Robin, what are you drinking?
First of all, I would like to just point out your very specific tea preferences. Only with milk, not during the summer.
I mean, listen, we all have to have a thing, Robin.
This is true. This is very true. I am drinking a blueberry mojito.
I'm drinking a pineapple mojito. Hey!
That sounds good.
Yeah. And I went a little lighter on my rum because it is like a Wednesday. So I'm like, well, Sari, tell us about your IBD connection. What brings you to our IBD community?
Yeah. So I'm an IBD patient. I was diagnosed at 11. So I've now lived a lot more years than without it, especially conscious ones. But I also have a mother with Crohn's disease and her father also had Crohn's disease. So third generation IBD patient.
That's remarkable. I think you're the first person we've had on that's had a familial history. So that's interesting. So talk to us about being diagnosed that young and also layer in your mom's Crohn's disease. Do they look similar to each other or how did her Crohn's disease affect your care and treatment and just generally how you interact with each other?
So my road to diagnosis was pretty fast since I do have a family history of it. My pediatrician was really great and pretty much we knew what I had before I was diagnosed. So it was just a matter of getting scheduled for a colonoscopy, getting connected to a pediatric GI, but she was also diagnosed at 11. So really, I mean, not that she was expecting it. It definitely was not expected. And she was very upset about it, but I don't really remember the process that much since I was a child. I remember feeling sick for several months, which feels long as a child. But now that I'm more involved in the IBD community and I talk to a lot of people, I was diagnosed very, very fast. And that definitely was because of the family connection. So her disease looks very different. And I think part of that is because a lot of these medications were not available when she was diagnosed. And so she had very major surgery 4 years after diagnosis, and surgery can cause different complications, but also, there weren't biologics for her until recently. And even when they came out, she is, I wouldn't say as well versed in the IBD community. So I don't think there was that many people to talk to. And she was hesitant to start them at the beginning. Now that they're so widely used, she's also on them. But because her disease was not as well managed as mine was from the beginning, it has looked differently. Like if there were biologics, could our diseases look more familiar? Perhaps, but I guess we won't ever know that.
So I'm curious because we've had a pediatric gastroenterologist on and we talked a teensy bit about transitioning from pediatric to adult care. And you're not super old, so this is still hopefully very fresh in your mind. In fact, you're very young compared to us. So you started
very
out
young.
You started out with obviously a pediatric gastroenterologist because you were so young, but what was that like to have to navigate the change from that pediatric gastroenterologist to an adult gastroenterologist and just dealing with all of this on your own?
So I decided to complete the transition when I was 18. I really started taking control of my care as soon as I could drive. So around 16, I started planning my own appointments, driving to my appointments, and often my mom would come with me, but that definitely made the transition easier. So I tell people, you should start that process gradually. It's very hard to go to college or get a new job and then all of a sudden have to deal with your care. But I think once you have that independence with driving, it's definitely easier. So I decided my senior year that I was going to University of Michigan. And since I knew I would be there, I looked for an adult GI there. And I started the process of going to see her while I was still a senior in high school. So I had the support at home. I wasn't moving that far away. I mean, I live like 45 minutes from campus, but still it feels different when you're on your own than when you're in your family household. So my parents were able to meet her. And when I moved up to college the following year, I felt fine taking control of all of that. I found a pharmacy on campus and because University of Michigan, everything's pretty close, which is nice. So I walked to all my appointments. I walked to the pharmacy and I was comfortable scheduling my own procedures and appointments by then. So it really wasn't a huge transition. So definitely I had the privilege of meeting my GI before college, which a lot of people don't if they go to university out of state, but that definitely helped the transition. So I think the earlier, the better to get started with that.
I commend you on that. And I wonder if your mom being a patient and living with it so long played into her encouraging you to take control of your care, because I also did that with my daughters, because I met someone very recently who she jokingly said that her pediatric specialist basically kicked her out of the office at 23. So I seriously commend you on taking initiative, and it made the transition so much easier, it sounds like, for you, because you were able to do it while you still had support, but also you had a mom who was encouraging you to do that. I'm assuming because of her own experience, because I have met a lot of parents that have a really hard time allowing their older children take control of their care because they don't trust that they're going to be able to do it or manage it. The question in all of that was, do you feel like it was because of your mom's experience that she was able to encourage you to do that?
Yeah, I think a good percentage of that has to do with her experience. And when it comes down to it, even if you try to take control of your child's care, if there's an emergency, right, they have to advocate for themselves in the hospital. So you can't protect them forever. And learning how to advocate for yourself for the first time in an emergency situation is awful. So definitely she knew that if you take control over your child's care, you're really doing them a disservice in the long run, because they need to learn how to do that eventually. And, your doctor is not going to take you very seriously if your mom is coming to your appointment past the age of 21. And so you have to be able to talk for yourself, for sure. The other part of it is just both my parents that's just their parenting style, and also me as a person. I have friends who also have siblings with IBD, and it's different, right? I think you have to know your child too. It's kind of like teaching your child to do laundry. If you think that, they're not going to do laundry once you stop doing the laundry for them, right? That's kind of an issue. You have to be willing to trust them that they will take over their care, but eventually you have to let go. So definitely, I think it was her experience and just who they are as parents in general.
I would imagine is both, like you said, this parenting style, it's you. And then also she has this as well. And it's like, you have to learn how to deal with it because I have too. When you were growing up, because you really don't remember a lot of your life without Crohn's, did you know that your grandfather also had Crohn's, or like, how did that play out in your family?
Yeah, I did know. I mean, obviously, I grew up with a mother who was chronically ill, and she was always there for me. I don't have any memory being young where, like, where is my mom? My mom can't be here, but I do remember her being sick in bed. And so I grew up with that as well. And, I always knew that she had Crohn's disease, even if I didn't understand what that was. And I knew her father had Crohn's disease. And I never got to meet him because he passed away before I was born. But these were things that I knew about. Was I able to piece that together at 11? No, nobody said, oh, you might have Crohn's disease. I never thought that. I don't think you think anything beyond, oh, I don't feel well at 11, which has its advantages because there isn't that mental component of diagnosis. When you're diagnosed older, you have all of the mental anguish that goes with that. When I was younger, I mean, I have a vivid memory post my first successful Remicade infusion, just shoveling a box of Cheez-Its in my mouth. And I was so thrilled to have an appetite again. It was like the best thing I ever tasted. And so, that wouldn't have been as positive of an experience had I been older and been able to think through things and worry about things. So there is an advantage to that. Not that we choose when we're diagnosed, but it's interesting to think about how that affects how you deal with that diagnosis.
Yeah, when we were talking to, a couple of weeks ago now, Tiffany Taft, who's a researcher in psychology and inflammatory bowel disease, I asked her about stigma and whether people who were diagnosed as children feel less stigmatized by their disease than people who are diagnosed older. And it does sound like there is something to that. Like you said, you sort of just don't know your life without it. And so that's interesting. And, and cheeses are delicious. I'm with you on that. Let's move on though, because you mentioned college. And one of the things you noted on your questionnaire is that when you did go to college, you did have to do some advocating for yourself for some accommodations. So talk to us about, did that go into your selection of universities? And then how did you work with your school to get what you needed?
Yeah, it didn't go into my selection of college. I knew I wanted to go to a larger university. And as far as I know, most large universities, even smaller universities, but definitely larger universities with more resources have students with disability centers that deal with that. And so I believe I just asked my GI, since she was the university GI, how I got started, and she filled out the paperwork. And I guess one of the nicer, I don't know if nicer is the word, but nicer things about having a chronic illness is that only had to be filled out once. So it was submitted before my freshman year. And once I got there, it was in place and I never really had to do anything again. And I met with, I think they call it like a student disability advocate, but somebody who works for the center, and they have a meeting with you and you discuss what accommodations you think are appropriate. And they put that in a letter, and then you hand that letter to your professors. And so I opted to take my exams in a different location, since a lot of larger classes don't allow you to go to the bathroom. And that was not something that was going to work out for me well. So I took all my exams in another room that allowed bathroom breaks. So I didn't get extra time, but they would stop the clock if I had to go to the bathroom and restart it when I came back. And I think I only used it literally once for one exam, but just the thought that I knew that I had it in place were I to feel sick or anxious really made me feel better. And so that was really important to me. That was, I think, the only accommodation I used. Of course, I discussed if I was sick and had to miss class, what an absence policy would look like. But overall, I actually used it to my advantage to meet professors in big classes. So I would email them the first week of school and say, hi, I have a letter I'd like to give you from the disability office. And I was actually able to meet them and introduce myself. So in a class of 300 people, that's pretty cool that I had a way to do that actually, made sense and not just out of the blue. So that was a silver lining there. But overall, it was a pretty simple process. The best part of University of Michigan having IBD is the Crohn's and Colitis Student Initiative community we have on campus. And so there's hundreds and hundreds of student organizations at University of Michigan, but I was looking through my freshman year and I saw that there was a student group specifically for people with IBD, and there's a festival at the beginning of the year. So I went up to the festival, I found the table and I walked up and I introduced myself and I said, I have IBD. I'm very interested in joining this group. And at the time I have a mother with Crohn's, so it wasn't like, I needed to meet someone for the first time, but, it really shaped my college experience. And it was definitely a factor in why I chose to stay at Michigan for graduate school, because the support that I received from this community has really helped me in college. And those were some of my sickest years post-diagnosis. So it was really pivotal in just learning about the disease and having friends with the disease. Very, very underrated, just to know that someone else understands and just to walk into a room and complain and someone else gets it. So that was fantastic.
What did that look like? So did they have it sounds like they had like gatherings or they'd have sort of social time, but what else did you have to do? To be a university club, did it have specific things you had to do?
No, there was nothing required, but the way the group is structured is so there are some educational meetings. So we would have doctors or professors that study chronic pain and mood, or dietitians come and present for a meeting. And then some meetings would just be for support. So it's really just an open discussion for people to talk about what's ever on their mind. And what's pretty cool is that at almost all the meetings, we have 1 to 2 GI doctors from the University of Michigan sit on the meetings. And so during the pandemic, that was super fantastic because we would just sit there and ask questions about COVID vaccines that nobody else had access to. So it was really nice just to be able to run a question by them, or they would offer their thoughts on something, but ultimately, they would kind of just listen and be there for support. But that was a really cool resource to have in college. But otherwise, it was really just about making friends. I have made some really good friends. I'm going to one of my good friends from CCSI's wedding this weekend. And so that's great. I had another friend who would pick me up for my infusions and we would just hang out because I'd have a lot of anxiety around infusions. And so she would just take my mind off of it. There was one time that I passed out during an infusion and I had a friend who was right there who came right to the hospital. My parents are an hour away. So that was just super nice. There were other people that had to go to the hospital and people from the club would just go and visit them. So it was a really unique, amazing experience to have for sure.
Yeah, I love that because we had another guest on and she was talking about her college experience, how a lot of the friends that she had, they didn't have IBD. And so they didn't get it. And so she said, I left college not feeling very close to these people because their college experience was going out and living it up and partying. And I was so sick during that time that I really couldn't do that. And even if I was well enough, I didn't have the energy to do it. And so it did shape her college in maybe a not as positive way. And so it's really lovely to hear that this group exists for people at the University of Michigan because it sounds really valuable.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, it's funny. It's about the times that you don't even realize kind of the group that you're in. So, for example, there was a new member who came to the group, and this was while I was president. And I walked in late and I apologized. I was like, I'm sorry, I'm late. I have my tea in my tea bag, just broken my tea. So there's stuff floating in my tea, but I already put my Miralax in it. So I don't want to just dump it out. So now I have to drink this tea with the tea leaves floating in the tea. And I was just like totally ranting. And, obviously I thought nothing of this experience. I was just speaking my mind. And a year later, this member who was new, she continued going to the club and she wrote this essay for the scholarship. And she discussed this story about me coming in and complaining about my tea leaves floating in my Miralax tea. And it really just hit me, it's very cliche, but just like the impact you can have on other people. And to her, she just felt like, wow, like I finally found people who understand me. And to me, I was just having a bad day. So it was just, I don't know, that moment was very pivotal for me, and it was definitely fantastic. So I love that community, and I'm a super big advocate for people to start that at other universities. And it's definitely very difficult because a lot of people, especially that are young, don't want to talk about their disease. So at any given university, there are people with IBD for sure. Whether they're ready to talk about that or ready to meet people is a different story, but it's definitely something that needs to happen on a larger scale in other universities. So I hope that those communities will build across the United States, because it has really helped me a lot. And I didn't even think I needed that because it's right in my home, but it's completely different having friends with IBD and having family with IBD, or knowing somebody, just an acquaintance with IBD. So yeah, it's been great for me.
I want to
That's
add,
awesome.
just because you said that, for people listening, the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation has an awesome resource called Campus Connect, or it was called Campus Connect, where you can find other people on campus that have IBD. And for anyone wanting to start this on your campus, you need a faculty sponsor, and there's a process. But you can start new clubs on campus. If you don't have a Crohn's and Colitis club, find faculty support and start it yourself. Don't wait for someone else to do it.
Well, and this is the perfect opportunity for you to go and talk to your Office of Student Support or Disability Services, because chances are they can help you with this too. I mean,
yeah,
they also know of other people who have this disease that have also come in to talk to them about accommodations and can help you promote it and things like that. So there's ways to get this started, but I love that you've already given some ideas and even a little bit of a blueprint to people who want to start this. And I do think there's some folks I have seen that have created an online version of this, maybe if they haven't found enough people in their campus. So there might even be some virtual resources for folks if they're comfortable doing that. I know it's a little bit, everybody's a little over it right now, but still some potential opportunities. That's a great story. I love that. And what a fun nugget to, hear that somebody took you on a day when you were just like, gosh darn it, this is just a terrible day. And she's like, actually, I found my people. That's really nice. And it doesn't have to be that you're like bemoaning living with IBD or living with Crohn's, like it's that your Miralax tea got ruined.
I love it. Okay, we're going to stay on the college train because I want to ask you about your course of study, because you were studying immunology. Did IBD play a part in that? Like, what led you to that choice? Tell me about it.
Yeah, so not directly. I don't think it directly played a role into why I chose that path. Really, I started loving chemistry in high school. And so I continued that, and I majored in biochemistry in undergrad. And I did some research and I did some internships to figure out what I wanted to do with that. And I decided that I'd want to go into drug development. Now, that decision was definitely partly based on my experience with IBD, because there was a point in my care where I had failed like every biologic readily available on the market. And to hear that there are really no options, that you're looking at, investigational drugs at 22 is terrifying, especially because I live in this time where there's more IBD medications than ever. And I've still reached the end of the line so fast. And so I felt like you can have the best doctors in the world, but if there aren't treatments available, there's nothing they can do. And so that thought process definitely factored into why I wanted to go into drug development. It kind of combined my personal history with what I like to study. So right now, the hottest thing to go into is immunology. And I took an immunology class and I liked it a lot. The caveat to that is I've had zero interest in studying or doing any research with IBD. And I felt like it's because, especially while I'm sick, it's such a huge part of my life. I have no real interest to bring that into my professional life, especially because I feel like it could almost compromise my decisions as a researcher, because of course I'd want something to work so bad. And there's an emotional piece to that. And so I don't think that for me, it would be beneficial to go into that. However, I've met lots of IBD patients who want to become gastroenterologists and want to study IBD. And I think that's cool too. Definitely a personal interest. But for me, that was never something I wanted to do. So yeah, I am studying immunology, and I do hope to move into the pharmaceutical industry surgery in some capacity for my career, but I don't directly, if I can help it, want to work on IBD. I always joked like, I'll cure or treat your illness and you can take care of mine. I like that approach a lot better. I hope that there are a lot of smart people working on IBD, but I don't want to be one of them.
I think that's a really thoughtful way to approach your choice, because you're right. You have skin in the game. And so you're right. You could lose some of your objectivity. And also it is nice to have that division between your job and your personal life. And some people are great with that. Some people, that's really important to them. And then there's some people like Robin who want to integrate it into every part of their life. And that's okay too. So I think figuring that out for yourself.
I had to
good.
step away. I had to
That's
step
true.
away after this last surgery and recovery and everything. I went through something similar to where like, it can't be everything. It can't be the focus of everything. It can't be my sole focus morning to night, and then maybe even dreaming about it. So I completely understand and respect the thoughtfulness that you put into that, because for a long time I was the opposite. Like I wanted everything I did, like Alicia said, I wanted everything that I did to revolve around that, to helping people with it, to all of those things. And now I just have this show.
But I think by you sharing your story with your colleagues and your fellow students is a great way to get them excited about it. Like you said, I'll do this, you do that. And, you can talk about the impact this has had on you, and that gets them fired up, hopefully.
Yeah, for sure. I don't worry about the research that goes on with IBD because I know there is a lot of research, and we're lucky in a sense to have so many of us for community, but also because there is an incentive for companies to invest in IBD. So while it's absolutely the worst to have an illness forever, we're a very good patient population. So I'm very excited about the treatments that will to come. I am thrilled every time I see something coming through the pipeline because I need more things to be waiting for me when I need them. So definitely looking forward to all of that.
This episode is sponsored by Well. Have you ever felt overwhelmed and unsure about what questions you should ask your doctor, or if you should get a referral to a dietitian? If so, you are not alone. The dietitians over at Well help patients every day navigate these questions and many more. They've just released an amazing free resource for patients called the IBD Patient Starter Kit that is jam-packed with tips and tools to empower you to become your own best advocate. Check out the show notes or head on over to romanwell.com to download a copy of the IBD Patient Starter Kit today.
So keeping with the treatment side of your story here, if you've tried all of the medicines, what are you doing now? What are you and your doctor figuring out for you?
Yeah, that's very interesting. So I guess a little bit of background is I started on Remicade and I developed reactions to Remicade about 2 years into my treatment. So when I was 13, I went on Humira, and I was on Humira for like 6 years, a very long time, and super grateful for that. And I never actually felt sick, but my doctor thought that by looking at biomarkers that the drug was not working for me. My inflammation was pretty high. I say in general, I'm just like an inflamed person. So she suggested actually that I try methotrexate to help the drug gain efficacy, and that didn't work. And I also was not thrilled being on methotrexate. So I tried Stelara, and then I got sicker on Stelara, and I got weird upper GI involvement. So I've always had a very center and upper case of IBD, which is apparently rare. So my symptoms were more throwing up than any bathroom issues, but the Stelara exacerbated that. So I got off of that. And then I went on Entyvio, and Entyvio made me sick in a different way. So I got off of that. And at that point, that's when I pretty much exhausted all good options, or options that doctors are more willing to prescribe. And so my doctor said, why don't you try Humira again? Because I was at a point where I was getting surgery after surgery, and these were minor surgeries. But I asked the surgeon, I said, maybe on my second procedure, I said, is this going to keep happening. And she basically said, yeah, like she said that if the medication doesn't work, it was just going to keep happening. And so that was actually right when the pandemic started. So I got back on Humira and I was on combination therapy with Imuran. And that's what I've been doing the past 2 years, and it worked. And I'm incredibly grateful. I hope it keeps working. It's definitely something that I have to work on, not worrying about when it will end, because, you know, these drugs don't last forever. So I try not to worry about it, but I'm definitely grateful that it got me through the worst of the pandemic during that time where it felt super unsafe to go to the doctor. There was no real access. I had that last minor surgery it was March 20th of 2020. And I walked into the University of Michigan hospital and there was literally no one there. I was sitting in between two cancer patients that were getting surgery. And I just felt like, you know, I'm sick, but I'm not that sick. Like, this is crazy. Like, how can they think that I'm this sick, that they're rescheduling everyone's surgery, but they felt that mine was so important that I'm sitting in between these two patients. So that was a very weird, eerie experience. And that was before masks were available at all. So it was just very bizarre overall to be in the hospital during that time. But luckily I improved. So that's what I'm doing now, is combination therapy. And I don't love it mentally because I would love to only be on one drug, but I recognize being healthy is great and I just need to stick with it. So we'll see what happens in the future.
Yeah, that is intimidating to not feel like you have any other options. But I know there are some newer types of medications, different mechanisms of action that are, you know, coming down the pipeline that, you know, we've had some of our doctors talking about. So fingers crossed that something else comes along that maybe works differently and works for you. But it is really interesting to hear that your Crohn's disease affects more of your sort of, like you said, sort of mid and upper. Other than throwing up, what other types of symptoms have you experienced that maybe people would be surprised by?
Yeah, so I can always pretty much tell when I'm getting sick because I definitely lose my appetite immediately. But because I have some esophageal involvement, I get nauseous just at the smell of food, or sometimes even at like the thought of food. And it's a very weird sense of nausea or I guess, or vomiting, because, you know, I think when you're classically sick with the stomach flu, you feel nauseous, you're moving to the bathroom, you throw up. Like, that's not at all what it was like for me. It was immediate. Like, there was no warning. And oftentimes before I was done eating. So that was definitely very difficult. Those symptoms were more part of when I was diagnosed. And so that was a weird thing to navigate because I would visit friends and their parents would ask why I'm not eating. And that's a whole another talk about stigma and young girls and all of that. But it would be different now, I think, as an adult because I'm more confident in myself. And so I would be able to have those conversations. But yeah, the nausea is definitely a big part of my symptoms. I also would get fevers a lot. I think that happens to some IBD patients, but I never really had bathroom issues, which is shocking to most IBD patients. So that is the one thing I cannot relate to. And I'm glad for it so far. It might hit me in the future. I'm thinking it will at some point, just because, I don't know, hopefully I have a lot of years left. So overall, it was more just pain and losing weight because of lack of appetite. But, you know, now when I feel hungry or when I have a meal and I'm not in pain still, I mean, I've been in remission for 2 years and I still often think like, oh, I'm so grateful that I just ate and I'm not feeling pain. And like, that's so wonderful. And I kind of want to keep that with me because, you know, the next time I get sick, at least I can say that I really enjoyed the time that I had, that I was not sick. So part of having a chronic illness is just really enjoying the times where you can eat and not worry about it. And I'm lucky enough that pretty much when I'm sick, I can't eat anything, but when I'm healthy, I don't have restrictions. So that is really wonderful. And most IBD patients don't have that. So I'm grateful for that.
I'm glad you can put it into that perspective for yourself, because I was sitting here thinking, boy, gosh, I would be really anxious a lot because, like you said, it's not predictable in a way. And so it sounds like you do get at least some warnings, but it feels like that would be pretty anxiety producing, the symptoms you're describing, that the knowing that you're going to be in pain, the knowing that you're going to have that nausea tough. That's a really tough one.
Yeah, I think that the biggest issue for me personally with IBD is really not the physical pain. I think most people can get through physical pain if they know it's going to end, especially people with chronic illness, right? We can get through most things. It's really the mental anguish that comes with it, that like, when is this going to end? Am I going to be able to live my life? Like, the symptoms are not sustainable. Those are really the issues. Or are there treatments left? Is someone going to be able to help me? There are lots of questions, lots of worries. And I definitely noticed that stark contrast, because that only started surfacing when I went to college. Before, I was really too young to have any of those worries. I guess my mom probably worried for me. But now that I'm older, it's really the mental part that is the issue. Stomach pain is terrible and all those symptoms are terrible, but it's not really the issue. You can get through that. It's really getting the support and the therapy necessary to get through the mental side of it. Because even when you're feeling well and those physical symptoms go away, because they will eventually, the mental stuff is still there. You're still there to deal with that. And then there's always the constant worry of, oh my God, is that going to come back? So that part never goes away. So that's really the chronic part. Most people with IBD are lucky enough to get some points where they're, healthier than others. It's really the mental part that's there no matter what.
I'm so glad that you mentioned therapy in there too, because I was taking myself off mute to chime in and say, that's why we advocate for therapy on this show. And that doesn't go away, even after, I'm sure your mom could attest to this, and me after 20 plus years, my most recent flare, like I was like, oh my gosh, like this can't get any worse. And then it does. And then you're like, is this what my new normal is going to be? And even now when I'm feeling better than I have in a long time, it's like, I'm so tuned. Maybe it's because it's so recent, and you could, speak to that too. Maybe it's because it is still so recent in my mind where I'm like, is that a thing? Like, is that coming back? What's happening? Like you, I am grateful and recognize all of the positive things, but also it still lives there. And that's why I go to a therapist too.
Yeah, for sure. I think I've seen a GI psychologist at the University of Michigan, which has been incredibly helpful. And again, something I wasn't really sure I needed, but once I had it, I was like, this is really useful. This is really changing things for me. And part of the therapy that I got with her was CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy. And I guess I'm not a professional in this at all, but from my understanding, right, it's not, you can't control necessarily, your body's reaction to something. Your immediate, every time, I feel pain or I feel nauseous, I think, oh my God, like, is this it? Did I only get 2 years from this drug? What am I going to do now? All those thoughts immediately pop into my head, but it's more about how I react to that. Can I, decompress? Can I calm myself down and say, IBD is definitely, my symptoms are related to stress too. So if I get myself in that cycle, I'm only hurting myself. So I try to tell myself, you need to calm down. Like, we'll worry about this if those symptoms persist in a week, right? Like, you can handle 5 minutes of pain. Like, you don't need to just fly off the handle and lose it, and it's very easy to do that after years. Anything that pops up is very scary, but you have to get yourself to a place where you can control your reactions to those thoughts, and thinking about it in that perspective has been really helpful. And you can translate that to other parts of your life, to really any reoccurring worries that you have, where you need to sometimes you just need to say, I'm going to table it till later and hope that you forget about it. Sometimes that's useful enough.
Yeah. The nice thing about CBT is it helps you recognize those triggers. It helps you recognize when your heart rate starts to go up, or you start to sweat, or you start to get those racing thoughts, and it helps you calm that back down again and talk yourself down from that moment. And so it does help in those moments when you are reacting viscerally to something, you're reacting automatically to something, and helps you cope with that. It's very valuable for a lot of people. It doesn't work for everybody, but it's valuable for a lot of people. And working with a psychologist, they can figure out what's best for you. And, the nice thing about a psychologist is, like you said, it's not hurting anything. Like, you going and talking to this person isn't going to hurt you. It's not like plastic surgery where once you get it done, you're like, oh, this was a mistake. Like, the psychologist is going to tell you if you don't need to be there. Like, he or she is going to be like, goodbye, there's the door. I've got plenty of other people to see. So, it's not going to hurt you to go talk to somebody. It can can be kind of painful when you're in it.
I was about to say that work can be hard and painful. Yes.
In a different way, in a cathartic way, perhaps.
Yes.
Hopefully. If you don't mind staying on this topic for a little while longer, one thing you did note for us is that the episode with Tiffany Taft and talking about medical trauma resonated with you. And that is something you've worked on. So if you don't mind talking about it, then talk to us about being a patient that has actually experienced this and gone through some therapy for it. You're getting a nice flip side of what we were talking about with Dr. Taft.
For sure. I would be happy to talk about it. I love following Tiffany Taft's work. I was introduced to a paper of hers a few years ago, and I thought nothing of it. And I guess the background to my story, which I'll make short, is the infusions that I got for Remicade. When I was a child, I started having reactions to, and they were probably allergic reactions. And at this point, I was getting home infusions, and I had a great home nurse, and she took care of everything. But rather than taking me off of the drug, my doctor at the time decided to give it a few more tries. And so I would expect to have an allergic reaction. And, of course, it would happen to some extent. And so that was a very scary time, especially as a child. However, I was a child, and so I didn't think that much of it after those infusions stopped and I was moved on to Humira. It wasn't until 6 years later that when I was talking to my doctor about getting off of Humira, she mentioned, the drug levels in your blood are very low and you could form antibodies. And being in background of science, I equated antibodies with allergic reactions, since that's the basis of allergic reactions. And it just triggered something in my brain where pretty much after that, I would take my injection and I would feel like I was having an allergic reaction. And I was having, panic symptoms, but I'd take my injection every week, and it was very unsustainable to have those feelings every week. And I had no control over them, really. I would have to call someone and talk to them for an hour after I took my injection, just to kind of distract myself. I went to the store and I bought liquid Benadryl, and I thought, oh, well, if I'm having an allergic reaction, like this will help. That is not what you do when you're having an allergic reaction to an injectable drug, which I knew because I'm in that field, but it was just something. And it got to the point where I would start drinking this Benadryl, which I didn't need, but just, it was something to calm me down because I thought, I'll be fine if I drink this. And then it started spreading into other aspects of my life where if I knew I was coming in contact with a common allergen, I would get very panicky. So I love peanut butter. I would eat peanut butter and I'd think maybe I'm going to have an allergic reaction, right? Completely illogical. And I knew it was illogical. I would, get upset if I touched latex gloves. I take immunology classes and I wasn't able to sit through the allergy lectures without feeling super anxious. And so I started telling my family therapist about it, just mentioning it. And she said, it sounds like you have post-traumatic stress symptoms. And I had no idea that was something, right? Like commonly we equate that to people who have been in war or, acute attacks of violence or something like that. And so I thought about it for a while. And as my symptoms got worse, I decided that I needed to find a therapist directly related to that. So I sought out a therapist. It didn't work out. I was not getting what I needed. I sought out another therapist. She had no background in people with chronic illness. So I spent all of my time explaining my illness, which was not useful for me. And then I finally found the GI psychologist, and immediately, I started working on improving how I would react to it. And it's really helped me. It's definitely not been easy. At the beginning, I thought, oh, well, I'll just go in and I'll talk to someone and then I'll feel better and I'll never have to worry about this again, because that is kind of what, small instances of therapy have been like for me. Like you go in and you talk about a fight you had with your mom and then you get over it and you leave. That was not what this was. So I've been working on it, and it's definitely easier to feel better when I'm not sick and I have a clear mind. So I recognize that while I'm doing really well right now with that, I might get worse in the future. But really, the process process of getting therapy directed at that and working on improving my reaction to triggers has really helped me, because my infusions, once I had those panic symptoms, were absolutely terrible. And it was all my own doing, really. Like, it was just my mind's doing. And I would make myself go alone because I want to be able to depend on myself to take care of myself. But it was awful. And I'm glad no one saw me in that sense. But I've definitely been working on it. So it's gotten a lot better.
Yeah, that's really difficult. And I'm glad you recognized, I'm glad you had somebody that did recognize it and pointed it out to you. I'm also glad that you continued to advocate for yourself and seek out the right person to work with, because I think just like we advocate for people to get second opinions or seek out another care provider if you're not happy, same thing with a psychologist or a therapist or a social worker. They're not everybody's going to be the right fit for you, or they're not going to have the right skill set to deal with what you specifically are looking for. So keep looking if you're not getting what you need from that person. Again, they're not going to take it personally. And that's, important. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Absolutely. Yeah. You have to keep looking for someone until you find someone that works for you. Chances are it won't be the first. So as long as you keep that drive to find someone, you will find someone that helps you.
Absolutely.
I hate to say this, but it is about that time. Thank you so much for being so vulnerable and sharing so much of your story with us. I have been on the precipice of tears at least 3 times during this conversation, and I've been able to hold it in. But it's time for the last question. So what is one piece of advice that you would like to share with the IBD community?
I've heard a lot of good advice from people. So I was trying to think about, what did I have to offer that's a little bit different? And I would say I follow some social media chronic illness influencers, and one of them, named Rana, who's an artist, made a piece of art that said, you don't have to feel inspired by your chronic illness. And that really resonated with me, because I think a lot of the message that we get from even people within the IBD community, but just society in general, is, you should be positive to whatever life throws at you. And with the IBD, that's really difficult. And I think it really contradicts the human experience in general. I think it's totally fine to complain and be upset and grieve, and you can reach a place of acceptance with your disease, which is really important, without it necessarily being positive. So while I hear people say, oh, I'm so grateful for my disease, I'm not grateful. And I think people say that because, they say, oh, IBD made me who I am. And I think that is true to some extent. For me, I think I'm a better person and a better friend and a better daughter. But if I could give IBD up, I would go back in time. And that's not to say I don't love all the people I've met. I've met amazing people. And, a lot of my relationships have to do with IBD. But people say, oh, I don't know how you do it, or, that your strength is so inspiring. And I say, I do know how I do it, right? There is no other option, and you would do it too. Or people say, oh, I'm scared of needles, I couldn't give myself a shot. And I say, you would get over it, because there's literally no other option. And so I don't feel inspiring, and I'm not seeking to inspire others. I'm seeking to support others, and I want to be supported, and I want to feel supported, but I don't think I'm here to inspire. And so I think people say it out of a good place, but I think it also perpetuates that idea of, oh, I have to be so positive, I have to be grateful, and I'm not grateful. So, I accept my disease, and that will change over time, but, you can be upset. And I think that is what a lot of patients need to hear, that you can be upset for years, and that's okay. And hopefully that will get better. But if you don't ever feel positive, that's okay too. As long as you can live your life and reach a point where you can move forward, that's all that's really necessary. So that is my advice.
I'm glad you said that, because I think, and maybe this isn't, but it feels like a very uniquely American thing to be like, you have to be happy. And this idea that if you're not, and frankly, social media perpetuates this as well, that if you're not happy, then it means something's wrong with you. And so I think, like you said, it silences a lot of people who they're not feeling inspired by this. They don't want this to be their identity. They don't want this to be the thing that people know about them. And it's okay to feel that way. It's okay not to inspire people with your story. I think that's why it's important to share a story stories from people like you that just say, yeah, this is a piece of me. This is a part of me. I'd give it up tomorrow, but I can't. And so I'm going to live with it, and I'm going to figure out ways to cope. And I'm going to celebrate the days that I have that are great and the meals that I have that are amazing. And, I'll cross the bridge if I come to it, that, when this changes for me, and figure out ways to cope. I'm glad you shared that. I really do think there's something pathological about the way we handle adversity here, and that it has to mean something. And it doesn't. Sometimes it's just a shitty situation. No pun intended.
Definitely agree. Thank you.
Robin already had to abandon us. And so I really appreciate you coming on. I really appreciate you reaching out. And I wish we had more time with you. I want to say cheers to you for joining us, and cheers to our audience. Thanks, guys, for joining us.
Hi, this is Sari. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, subscribe, and share with a friend. Thank you.